These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Plexiderm, real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. Gabby takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at gabby.com/Tom. HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. And Superbeats, heart chews for heart healthy energy. More info at superbeatsradio.com/Tom.
Fake news. November 8, 2016. At 10 p.m., I made one last circuit of the newsroom. Our CEO, Mark Thompson, stood near the political desk, looking on with his wife and a small group of others connected somehow to the Times. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan remained in doubt, but the reality was sinking in. Donald Trump was on the verge of winning the American presidency. I'd been in newsrooms on election nights before. I know how it's supposed to be. The only thing that ever mattered was the horse race, think Gore Bush, or the historic moment, think Obama-McCain. There was no investment in which candidate was winning. He or she was destined to disappoint in the long run. And the dominant emotion was a certain not quite cynical detachment amid the electric buzz of the vote count and projections and the anticipation of relief that the endless push of the campaign was finally over. Sure, couldn't ignore the victories or the big picture moments. The day after stories would be celebratory in their way, duly restrained, but with a nod to victory itself. Not unlike the next day account of a Super Bowl game or Game 7 of the World Series. Capture the triumph for a night or relish the race too close to call. Leave the dancing and crying for others, for the believers. But this night was like no other election night. There had been an investment, not just journalistic, but spiritual. Donald Trump had campaigned not just against Hillary Clinton, but also against the New York Times and the American press, the mainstream American press. And his astonishing rise to the top of the Republican Party had been built on his near daily attacks on facts, on the very idea that facts matter. For journalists who
plant now will bring a harvest. May the choices they make bring blessings, healing, and prosperity to our land. We pray in your merciful name. Amen.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
please be seated, and if there is no objection, the journal of proceedings of the trial are approved to date, and I'd ask the Sergeant-at-Arms to make the proclamation.
Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye. All persons are commanded to keep silence on pain of imprisonment while the Senate of the United States is sitting for the trial of the article of impeachment exhibited by the House of Representatives against Donald John Trump, former President of the United States.
Senate will be in order, and the majority leader is recognized.
For the information of senators, it's my understanding the schedule today will be similar to yesterday's proceedings. We'll plan to take a short break every 2-3 hours, and we'll accommodate a 30-minute recess for dinner, assuming it is needed.
Then, pursuant to the provisions of Senate Resolution 47, the managers for the House of Representatives have 8 hours remaining to make the presentation of their case. The Senate will now hear you, and the presiding officer recognizes Mr. Manager Raskin to continue the presentation of the case for the House of Representatives.
Mr. President, thank you. Distinguished senators, Representative DeGette of Colorado will now show how the insurrectionists themselves believed that they were following President Trump's marching orders.
My friends and colleagues, yesterday was an emotionally wrenching day. As I watched the footage of the violence in the Capitol building, my own experience flooded back to me. I was one of the unlucky members who was stuck in the House gallery along with Congresswoman Dean. As the House floor was cleared beneath us of members and staff, we could see the mob pounding on the door to the House chamber. We could see the Capitol police officers inside the chamber pull their guns and point them at the intruders. Then we heard gunshots on the other side, and we flung ourselves down on the floor and removed our member pins. Then we heard pounding on the very flimsy gallery doors right up above us. Finally, after that situation for some time, we were told to run out of
Representative
the door at the
Diana
end of the
DeGette
gallery.
is giving the House impeachment manager's case against Donald Trump in the trial in the Senate week. Take it live.
The SWAT team pointing automatic weapons at marauders on the floor. Looking at these people makes you wonder, who sent them here? In the next few minutes, I want to step back from the horrors of the attack itself and look at January 6th from a totally different perspective, the perspective of the insurrectionists themselves. Their own statements before, during, and after the attack make clear the attack was done for Donald Trump, at his instructions, and to fulfill his wishes. Donald Trump had sent them there. They truly believed that the whole intrusion was at the president's orders, and we know that because they said so. Many of them actually posed for pictures, bragging about it on social media, and they tagged Mr. Trump in tweets. Folks, this was not a hidden crime. The president told them to be there, and so they actually believed they would face no punishment. The defense argued in their briefs, and they argued again here on Tuesday, that the insurrectionists were acting on their own, that they were not incited by President Trump or acting in his direction. This is in their brief, quote, "They did so of their own accord and for their own reasons and are being criminally prosecuted." But that's just not the case. It's not what the insurrectionists actually said. They said they came here because the president instructed them to do so. Leading up to the attack, the insurrectionists said they were coming to D.C. for President Trump. He invited them with clear instructions for a specific time and place and with clear orders. Stop the fight, or to fight to stop the certification in Congress by any means necessary. The crowd at Donald Trump's speech echoed and chanted his words. And when people in the crowd followed his direction and marched to the Capitol, they chanted the same words as they breached this building. Now let's return to this speech for a moment. During the rally, President Trump led the crowd in a Stop the Steal chant. Here's what that chant sounded like from the crowd's perspective.
There's a favorite term that all of you people really came up with. We will stop the steal.
Soon after, the president basked as the crowd chanted, "Fight for Trump." And when he incited the crowd to show strength, people responded. Storm the Capitol, invade the Capitol. Here are both of those moments, but from the crowd's perspective.
Thank you. You'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength.
Yes.
Invade the Capitol building.
We also have another perspective from this moment, online extremist chatter. At the same time as the people in the crowd shouted, "Take the Capitol building," as President Trump said, "Show strength," a person posted to Parler saying, quote, "Time to fight, civil war is upon us." Another user said, quote, "We are going to have a civil war, get ready." An analysis found that members of Civil War quadrupled on Parler in the hour after Donald Trump said, "Show strength." When the insurrectionists got to the Capitol, they continued those rally cries. Insurrectionists holding Confederate flags and brandishing weapons cheered the president's very words. You heard them chanting, "Stop the steal." And as the crowd chanted at the rally, the crowd at the Capitol made clear who they were doing this for. They also chanted, "Fight for Trump." And it wasn't just that they were doing this for Mr. Trump, they were following his instructions. They said he had invited them, and in fact, as we heard, he had invited them. As one man explained on a live stream he taped from inside the Capitol, quote, "Our president wants us here. We wait and take orders from our president." Footage from inside the Capitol shows when the insurrectionists first got into the building and confronted police, the mob screamed at the officers that they were listening to President Trump.
We're outnumbered. There's a fucking million of us out there, and we are listening to Trump. You're the boss.
The insurrectionists argued with law enforcement that they shouldn't even be fighting them because they believed that the commander-in-chief was ordering this. This was the person's understanding. When President-elect Biden went on television that day to demand an end to the siege, One woman asked this.
Does he not realize President Trump called us to siege the place?
The examples of these types of comments are endless. Don't worry, I won't play all of them. But it wasn't just the words of the insurrectionists that proved that they did this in response to orders from their commander-in-chief. We can see this in the fact that they were not hiding. One rioter in a live stream at the Capitol said, quote, "He'll be happy. We're fighting for Trump."
Let's call Trump, yes! Dude, let's tell Trump what's up.
Trump would be very upset, right?
And he'd be like, no, just say we love him. We love you, bro. No, he'll be happy. What do you mean? We're fighting for Trump.
And again, this was not an isolated incident. The individuals in this slide posted photos of themselves committing these crimes. Trump supporters who had broken into the Capitol were taking selfies, streaming live videos, and posing. In fact, they wanted the president to know, this is me. In fact, you can see the person wrote on his own posting, this is me. And if there were any remaining doubt, after hours of prompting, when President Trump finally told the insurrectionists to go home, only then did some of them begin to listen. As you previously saw, at 4:17 p.m., Mr. Trump released a pre-recorded video saying to the mob, "Go home, we love you, you're very special." Shortly after he tweeted this video, a few of the insurrectionists who had seen it could be claiming victory and telling people to go home because of Donald Trump's message and instructions. You saw earlier the insurrectionist Jacob Chansley, who told someone, quote, "We won the day." A little before that video of Chansley, he
the House impeachment managers are making their case. We will continue with our live coverage.
And instructed them to go home because of the video that President Trump had tweeted. Let's watch.
Today is ours. We won the day. That's why Donald Trump has asked everybody to just go home. You can look it up on his Twitter. He just did a video. A minute long. He asked everybody to go home.
Even after the attack, the insurrectionists made clear to law enforcement that they were just following President Trump's orders. They didn't shy away from their crimes because they thought they were following orders from the commander-in-chief, and so they would not be punished. They were wrong. After the attack, there were dozens of arrests. These were federal offenses, including assaulting the police. When law enforcement interviewed the people who were at the Capitol on January 6th, they once again said it was because the president told them to be there. Robert Sanford was seen in this widely circulated video throwing a fire extinguisher that struck a Capitol police officer outside the building. A witness told the FBI that Sanford said he had traveled to Washington, D.C. on a bus with a group of people. The group had gone to the White House and listened to Donald J. Trump's speech and then had followed the president's instructions and gone to the Capitol. Folks, the insurrectionists didn't just make this up. As Sanford's lawyer explained, you're being told you've got to fight like hell. Does fight like hell mean you throw things at people? Maybe. The lawyer added that his client, quote, wouldn't have been there if it weren't for the president. Now, Sanford wasn't the exception. He was the rule. In their statements after the attack, insurrectionists routinely echoed what they had said before and during the attack. They were there because the president told them to be. Now look, the lawyers who are saying that their clients were told to commit these acts by Mr. Trump, well, they know that putting the blame on the president doesn't exonerate their clients. They're just saying it, frankly, because that's exactly what happened. Another Trump supporter who's been federally charged is Texas real estate agent Jennifer Ryan. Now, Ms. Ryan has given many TV interviews in which she says she was only doing what the president asked her and others to do. She also recorded video before the rally talking about the mob's plans for violence. And here's what she said.
Personally, I do not feel a sense of shame or guilt from my heart from what I was doing. I thought I was following my president. I thought I was following what we were called to do. He asked us to fly there. He asked us to be there. So I was doing what he asked us to do. Ultimately, yes, we were going in solidarity with President Trump. President Trump requested that we be in D.C. on the 6th. So this was our way of going and stopping this deal.
If it comes down to war, guess what? I'm going to be there.
We're all going to be up here and we're going to be breaking those windows.
Yet another Trump supporter who was arrested after breaching the Capitol, Douglas Sweet, explained in a media interview why he did it. Referring to Donald Trump, Mr. Sweet said, quote, he said, "Hey, I need my digital soldiers to show up on January 6th, and we all did." Some of these individuals who joined in the attack on our Capitol did so as part of violent racist groups.
The House impeachment managers are making their case before the Senate right now.
Daniel Goodwin is a self-proclaimed member of the Proud Boys. He was one of many.
Thank you.
On November 7th, Goodwin tweeted a picture showing the Proud Boys logo surrounded by "Stand back and stand by," and the quote, again, "Stand back and stand by," and "Await orders from our commander-in-chief." Look closely at this slide. You are looking at an image of Goodwin's own tweet. He was such a loyal follower of President Trump that he used the president's photo as his own profile picture on Twitter. Now remember, President Trump told them to stand back and stand by at the debate. They took it as a call to arms. And when he called them to arms, they were all ready to act. They were waiting for their orders, which they got on January 6th. And Goodwin followed those orders. He stood ready as others broke into the windows at the Capitol and climbed inside. Here he is on another of the insurrectionists' live stream in one of the first floor hallways of the building. When it became clear that Donald Trump was not going to save these folks from prosecution, when it became clear that the commander-in-chief had given false commands that went against this country, some of his supporters even expressed regret, and they said they felt duped. Here's Jacob Chansley again, who we saw in a video claiming victory after the president told the rioters to go home. Earlier in the afternoon, as you'll recall, Chansley carried a spear as he breached the Capitol, entered the Senate through the gallery, and went right here onto the Senate floor. Chansley left a threatening note for Vice President Pence right there on the Senate dais. It read, quote, "It's only a matter of time. Justice is coming." On January 7th, Chansley spoke to the FBI, and he said that he came as part of a group effort with other patriots from Arizona at the request of the president that all patriots come to D.C. on January 6, 2021. On January 14th, Chansley's lawyer gave an interview to Chris Cuomo in which he said that Chansley was there, quote, at the invitation of our president, who said he would walk down Pennsylvania Avenue with him. In fact, Chansley's lawyer now says that Chansley felt duped by the president and he regrets what the president brought him to do. This man who ran through our halls, who ran into this chamber, who sat right there on the dais, and who wrote a note for Vice President Pence that he was coming for him, he and those with him declared they would remove us from office if we went against Donald Trump. Now he's saying he would not have done any of that if Mr. Trump had told him not to. Chansley's not alone in his post-arrest confession that he was following the directions of Donald Trump. As more and more of these people have been charged, the confession and the regret simply cascades. More and more insurrectionists are admitting that they came at Trump's direction. When Riley June Williams, known for allegedly helping steal laptops from Speaker Pelosi's office, appeared in court on January 21st, her lawyer said to the judge, quote, "It is regrettable that Ms. Williams took the president's bait and went inside the Capitol." Troy Smocks, who was in the Capitol riot on January 6th, posted online that day, quote, President Trump told us to fight like hell. He also posted that the president, quote, said that our case was a matter of national security. Samuel Fisher was charged with disorderly conduct and illegally being in the Capitol on January 6th. That day, before the attack on this building, he wrote on his website, quote, Trump just needs to fire the bat signal, and quote, then the pain comes. The lawyer for Dominic Pizzola, a leader of the Proud Boys, who was the first person to break inside the Capitol, said that President Trump effectively told his client and others, quote, people of the country, come on down. Let people know what you think. Quote, logical thinking was, he invited us down. Pizzola's lawyer went on. These were people acting in a way they've never acted before. And it begs the question, who lit the fuse? End quote. On January 6th, we know who lit the fuse. Donald Trump told these insurrectionists to come to the Capitol and stop the steal. And they did come to the Capitol. And they tried to stop the certification. They came because he told them to. And they did stop our proceedings, but only temporarily, because he told them to. Have you noticed throughout this presentation the uncanny similarity over and over and over again of what all these people are saying? They said what Donald Trump said, and they echoed each other. Stand back and stand by. Stop the steal. Fight like hell. Trump sent us. We are listening to Trump. The riots that day left at least 7 people dead, more than 150 people injured, members, senators, and our staffs, all traumatized to this day. Damage and pain to our Capitol, damage and pain to Americans, damage to our police force, and damage to other nations who have always seen us as a bastion of democracy. All of these people who've been arrested and charged, they're being held accountable for their actions.
Thom Hartmann Program.
Their leader, the man who incited them, must be held accountable.
We'll be back with more live coverage of the House impeachment managers presenting their case against Donald Trump before the United States Senate.
That the insurrectionists acted at Donald Trump's direction. They said so. They were invited here. They were invited by the President of the United States.
The Constitution, not your paycheck!
finished her case, and now I believe Jamie Raskin is about to speak. He'll probably be introducing the next person. We'll see what happens here. I believe this is Congressman Jamie Raskin, who's the lead manager of the House impeachment, among the House impeachment managers. And maybe they're just having a problem getting his mic open, or actually it looks like somebody's fiddling with the screen while he's trying to speak, so maybe they're queuing up some video. This presentation has relied very, very heavily on audio and video from the whole process, from Trump giving his incitement speech, to the mob marching down to the Capitol, to storming the Capitol, to trying to find and hang the Vice President of the United States for looking to assassinate Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives. The individual members who were up in the gallery, who kind of got trapped up there on the kind of the balcony above the where the session was holding. A number of people were up there just to socially distance during a pandemic, and they couldn't get out as easily as the people on the floor. There wasn't an easy exit there. They were taking their congressional pins off so that they wouldn't be attacked by the mob as members of Congress. I mean, it's fascinating. Jamie Raskin is speaking now. Here he is. He's the lead impeachment manager.
Senators, Representative DeGette just showed how the insurrectionists believed and understood themselves to be following President Trump's marching orders. She explained in chilling detail how they were acting in perfect alignment with his political instructions and his explicit strategy to retain power. They did what he told them to do. This pro-Trump insurrection did not spring into life out of thin air. We saw how Trump spent months cultivating America's most dangerous extremist groups. We saw how he riled them up with corrosive lies and violent rhetoric, so much so that they were ready and eager for their most dangerous mission, invalidating the will of the people to keep Donald Trump in office. But we must remember that this was not the first time Donald Trump had inflamed and incited a mob. Trump knew that his incitement would result in violence, not only because of the thousands of violent messages that were posted all over the forums and the widespread news of preparations for violence among extremist groups and his communications on Twitter with the insurrectionists themselves. He knew it also because he'd seen many of the exact same groups he was mobilizing participate in extremist violence before. Moreover, he'd seen clearly how his own incitement to violence and praise after the violence took place galvanized, encouraged, and electrified these extremist followers. These tactics were road tested. January 6th was a culmination of the president's actions, not an aberration from them. The insurrection was the most violent and dangerous episode so far in Donald Trump's continuing pattern and practice of inciting violence. But I emphasize so far. Earlier, Congresswoman Plaskett showed several episodes of Trump's incitement that took place during the presidential election. But his encouragement of violence against other public officials who he thought had crossed him long predates the 2020 campaign. The incitement of violence is always dangerous, but it's uniquely intolerable when done by the President of the United States of America. But that became the norm. On President Trump's watch, white supremacists and extremist groups have spread like wildfire across the land. His own Department of Homeland Security called homegrown terrorism the #1 threat facing Americans today. But no matter how many people inside and outside government begged him to condemn extreme elements promoting violence, and indeed civil war in America and race war in America, he just wouldn't do it. And that's because he wanted to incite and provoke their violence for his own political gain and for his own strategic objectives. Ever since he became president, Trump revealed what he thought of political violence. For his side, he praised it and he encouraged it. Right now, I'm going to play for you just a few clips from over the years when the president's words successfully incited his supporters into assaulting his opponents.
Before the House impeachment, or before the Senate.
I was nice. Oh, take your time. The second group, I was pretty nice. The third group, I'll be a little more violent. And the fourth group, I'll say, get the hell out of here. All right, yeah, get him the hell out of here, will you, please? Get him out of here. Throw him out. Get a little notice in case you see the security guys. We have wonderful security guys. They said, Mr. Trump, there may be somebody with tomatoes in the audience. So if you see somebody getting ready to throw a tomato, knock the crap out of them, would you? Seriously. Okay? Just knock the hell. I promise you, I will pay for the legal fees. I promise.
Well, we've seen these clips and many, many more like them before, but think about the brutal power and effectiveness of his words with his followers. You heard him, told his supporters to be a little more violent, and they responded to his command by literally dragging a protester across the floor at one of his campaign rallies. Get him the hell out of here, throw him out. His supporters punched and kicked another protester as he was escorted from the hall. He told supporters to knock the hell out of people who opposed him and promised to pay the legal fees of the assailants. Time after time, he encouraged violence. His supporters listened and they got the message. But it wasn't just Trump's encouragement of violence that conditioned his supporters to participate in this insurrection on January 6th. It was also his explicit sanctioning of the violence after it took place. Let's watch some of those incidents, beginning with Trump praising supporters who had assaulted a black protester.
But we've had a couple that were really violent, and the particular one, when I said, like to bang them, that was a very vicious, he was a guy who was swinging very loud and then started swinging at the audience. And you know what? The audience swung back. And I thought it was very, very appropriate. He was swinging, he was hitting people, and the audience hit back. And that's what we need, a little bit more of.
And we'll talk to you about that later.
Yeah, but there's not going to be time. I'm just curious if you have
Okay,
the
speak
right
with
now.
Shane, please.
But you don't have.
Sick and tired of you guys. The last time that came in here, you did the same thing. Get the hell out of here. Get the hell out of here. The last guy did the same thing. You were the guardian.
Yes, and you just broke my glasses.
The last guy did the same damn thing.
You just body slammed me and broke my glasses.
But Greg is smart. And by the way, never wrestle him. You understand that? Never. Any guy that can do a body slam, he's my kind.
Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us!
I'm not even saying we're non-violent. I'm saying that fucking we didn't aggress. We did not initiate force against anybody. We're not non-violent. We'll fucking kill these people if we have to.
Well, I do think there's blame. Yes, I think there's blame on both sides. You look at both sides. I think there's blame on both sides. And you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
So just in case you didn't catch all of that, the president praised a Republican candidate who assaulted a journalist as my kind of guy. He said there were, quote, very fine people on both sides when the neo-Nazis, the Klansmen, and Proud Boys invaded the city, the great city of Charlottesville, and killed Heather Heyer. And he said that an attack on a black protester at one of his rallies was very, very appropriate. Does that sound familiar? Listen to how President Trump responded when asked about his own conduct on January the 6th.
What is your personal responsibility?
So if you read my speech, and many people have done it, it's been analyzed, and people thought that what I said was totally appropriate.
So there the pattern is, staring us in the face. Very, very appropriate, he said after a man was assaulted at one of his rallies. Totally appropriate was how he characterized his incitement on January 6th, meaning that, of course, if given the chance, he would gladly do it again, because why would he not engage in totally appropriate conduct? An examination of his past statements makes it clear that when Donald Trump tells a crowd, as he did on January 6th, fight like hell, or you won't have a country anymore, he meant for them to fight like hell. On January 6th, that became clear to all of America. Now, let's consider the events, senators, that took place last year in Michigan, where President Trump demonstrated his willingness and his ability to incite violence against government officials who he thought were getting in his way. When responding to extremist plots in Michigan, Trump showed he knew how to use the power of a mob to advance his political objectives. Beginning in March, Trump leveled attacks on Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer for the coronavirus policies in her state. On March 17th, the day after Governor Whitmer pushed the federal government to better support the states on COVID-19, Trump criticized her handling of the pandemic, tweeting, "Failing Michigan governor must work harder and be much more proactive. We are pushing her to get the job done. I stand with Michigan." March 27th, he added, "I love Michigan. One of the reasons we're doing such a great job for them during this horrible pandemic. Yet your governor, Gretchen Whitmer, is way in over her head. She doesn't have a clue, likes blaming everyone for her own ineptitude. Hashtag MAGA." By April, Trump's rhetorical attacks and name-calling turned to calls for mass mobilization of his supporters. This was a sign of things to come. On April 17th, 2020, he tweeted, quote, "Liberate Michigan." Not even 2 weeks later, on April 30th, his supporters marched on the Michigan State Capitol in Lansing. They stormed the building. Trump's marching orders were followed by aggressive action on the ground.
We have a right. Let us in. Let us in. Let us in. No more rainbows. No more. Heil Hitler. Heil Hitler. The winner. The winner. The winner. You policemen are all cowards. You betrayed us. The police have betrayed the people. Lock her up! Lock her up! Lock her up! Lock her up! Lock her up!
As the video shows, these militant protesters showed up ready to take a violent stand. They came armed and tightly packed themselves into the building with no regard, of course, for social distancing. This Trump-inspired mob may indeed look familiar to you. Confederate battle flags, MAGA hats, weapons, camo army gear, just like the insurrectionists who showed up and invaded this chamber on January 6th. The siege of the Michigan State House was effectively a state-level dress rehearsal for the siege of the U.S. Capitol that Trump incited on January 6th. It was a preview of the coming insurrection. President Trump's response to these two events was strikingly similar. Following the armed siege in Lansing, President Trump refused to condemn the attacks on the Michigan Capitol or denounce the violent lawbreakers. Instead, he did just the opposite. He upheld the righteousness of his violent followers' cause, and he put pressure on the victim of the attack to listen to his supporters. The day after the mob attack in Lansing, Trump told Governor Whitmer to negotiate with the extremists, tweeting that the governor should just, quote, give a little to the violent men who had stormed the Capitol, threatening not only the stability of the Michigan government, but her own life. As you can see, he tweeted, the governor of Michigan should give a little and put out the fire. These are very good people, but they are angry. They want their lives back again safely. See them, talk to them, make a deal. The president says heavily armed extremists carrying Confederate battle flags and pushing past police to overtake the Michigan State House chamber are very good people and just negotiate with them. It's clear he doesn't think that they're at fault in any way at all. But April 30th wasn't the only time Trump supporters stormed the Michigan Capitol. Emboldened by his praise and his encouragement and support, they escalated again. Governor Whitmer refused to capitulate to the president's demand to negotiate with them. 2 weeks later, on May 14th, Trump's mob again stormed the state capitol. This time, as you can see here, one man brought a doll with a noose around the neck, foreshadowing the appearance of the large gallows erected outside of this building, downstairs from here on January 6th, as the crowd chanted, and I still can hear the words ringing in my ear, hang Mike Pence, hang Mike Pence, hang Mike Pence. Over the coming months, even after a crowd threatening Governor Whitmer stormed the Capitol, Trump continued to assail her in public. At a rally in Michigan on September 10th, Trump whipped up the crowd against Governor Whitmer, saying, quote, she doesn't have a clue about reopening her own state's economy. The crowd cheered. Then, on October 8th, the precise consequences of the president's incitement to violence were revealed to the whole world. Look at this. 13 men were arrested by the FBI for plotting to storm the Michigan State Capitol building, launch a civil war, kidnap Governor Whitmer, transport her to Wisconsin, and then try and execute her. This was an assassination conspiracy, a kidnapping conspiracy. Look at the language that they used. In the charging document, the FBI reported that one of the conspirators said he needed, quote, 200 men to storm the Capitol building and take political hostages, including the governor. The suspect called it a snatch and grab, man. Grab the effing governor. One of those men has already pled guilty to this conspiracy. The plot was well organized, just like the one that was coming on January the 6th. The men in Michigan even considered building Molotov cocktails to disarm police vehicles and attempted to construct their own IEDs, something that actually happened here on January 6th. Police authorities arrested extremists who had weapons and materials to build explosive devices, including one man found with an assault rifle and enough materials to make 11 Molotov cocktails. On September 17th, 2020, one of the Michigan conspiracists posted, when the time comes, there will be no need to strike fear through presence. The fear will be manifested through bullets. And what did Donald Trump do as president of the United States to defend one of our nation's governors against a plotted kidnapping by violent insurrectionists? Did he publicly condemn violent domestic extremists who hoped and planned to launch a civil war in America? No, not at all. He further inflamed them by continuing to attack the governor who was the object of their hatred in this kidnapping conspiracy. The very night this conspiracy became public, and that Governor Whitmer learned that there were 13 men who were planning to kidnap and likely kill her, Trump did not condemn the violence. He did not criticize the extremists. He didn't even check on Governor Whitmer's safety. He chose to vilify Governor Whitmer again, and then amazingly took credit for foiling the plot against her, demanding her gratitude. And then he quickly, of course, changed the subject to Antifa. He tweeted, Governor Whitmer has done a terrible job. He demanded that she thank him for the law enforcement operation that had foiled the kidnapping conspiracy that had been encouraged by his rhetoric. On October 17th, a little over a week after these people were arrested for preparing to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer, Trump riled up a boisterous crowd in Muskegon with more slashing personal attacks on Whitmer, driving the crowd to chant, "Lock her up, lock her up." He had now seen that some of his followers were prepared to engage in criminal violence with orchestrated attacks, deadly weapons, and willing bodies to storm a state capitol building and to attack his perceived political enemies. And so as the crowd chanted, "Lock her up," he pivoted to his next goal. He told them they couldn't trust the governor to administer fair elections in Michigan. He used a crowd that he knew would readily engage in violence to prepare his followers for his next and, of course, his paramount political objective, claiming the election was stolen and inciting insurrectionary action. And he did it again on October 27th during a pre-election rally speech in Lansing, Michigan, where the Capitol had been stormed. Trump openly joked with the crowd about critics saying his words had provoked the violent plot against Governor Whitmer. Check it out. It's telling.
We got to get her going. I don't think she likes me too much.
To make the case against Trump before the United States Senate.
See, I don't comment on that because every time if I make just even a little bit of a nod, they say, the president led them on. No, I don't have to lead you on. Even a little nod, they say, the president said, your governor, at the urging of her husband, who has abused our system very badly, the only man allowed in the state of Michigan, the only man allowed to go sailing is her husband. No, your governor, I don't think she likes me too much. Hey, I'm the one, it was our people that helped her out with her problem. I mean, we'll have to see if it's a problem, right? People are entitled to say maybe it was a problem, maybe it wasn't. It was our people, my people, our people that helped her out.
So President Trump offered them a little winking inside joke about his constant incitement of the mob and how much can actually be communicated by him with just a little nod. Just a little nod. He presided over another pounding, rhythmic rendition of his trademark chant, "Lock her up, lock her up." Then, referring to the FBI's foiling of the kidnapping conspiracy, which was deadly serious, he said that he helped her out with the problem. Maybe it was a problem, maybe it wasn't. We'll have to see. Maybe it was a problem, maybe it wasn't. The President of the United States of America. He could not bring himself to publicly oppose a kidnapping and potential assassination conspiracy plot against a sitting governor of one of our 50 states. Trump knew exactly what he was doing in inciting the January 6th mob. Exactly. He had just seen how easily his words and actions inspired violence in Michigan. He sent a clear message to his supporters. He encouraged planning and conspiracies to take over Capitol buildings and threaten public officials who refused to bow down to his political will. Is there any chance Donald Trump was surprised by the results of his own incitement? Let's do what Tom Paine told us to do. Use our common sense. The sense we have in common as citizens. If we don't draw the line here, what's next? What makes you think the nightmare with Donald Trump and his lawmaking and violent mobs is over? If we let him get away with it, and then it comes to your state capitol, or it comes back here again, what are we going to say? These prior acts of incitement cast a harsh light on Trump's obvious intent, his unavoidable knowledge of the consequences of his incitement, the unavoidable knowledge of the consequences of his incitement, and the clear foreseeability of the violent harm that he unleashed on our people and our republic. January 6th was not some unexpected radical break from his normal law-abiding and peaceful disposition. This was his state of mind. This was his essential MO. He knew that, egged on by his tweets, his lies, and his promise of a wild time in Washington to guarantee his grip on power, his most extreme followers would show up bright and early, ready to attack, ready to engage in violence, ready to fight like hell for their hero. Just like they'd answered his call in Michigan. President Trump has said over and over his supporters are loyal. In his own words, his supporters are the most loyal that we've seen in our country's history. And he knew that his most hardcore supporters were willing to direct violence at elected officials, indeed to attack and lay siege to a Capitol building. And he knew they would be ready to heed his call on January 6th to stop the steal by using violence to block the peaceful transfer of power in the United States. He knew they were coming. He brought them here, and he welcomed them with open arms. We hear you and love you from the Oval Office. My dear colleagues, is there any political leader in this room who believes that if he is ever allowed by the Senate to get back into the Oval Office, Donald Trump would stop inciting violence to get his way? Would you bet the lives of more police officers on that? Would you bet the safety of your family on that? Would you bet the future of your democracy on that? President Trump declared his conduct totally appropriate. So, if he gets back into office and it happens again, we'll have no one to blame but ourselves.
Open incitement repeatedly over a long period of time.
President Trump's total lack of remorse after the insurrection.
Who's going to talk about Trump's current perspective on all of this. This is just an extraordinary presentation. Ted Lieu is coming up to the microphone here, I believe.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, here he is.
My colleagues walked you through President Trump's actions leading up to January 6th and then the horrific events on January 6th. And we saw both during the attack as well as in the days after the attack that this was a president who showed no remorse and took no accountability. In fact, quite the opposite. As Representative Raskin showed you, President Trump claimed that his actions were, quote, totally appropriate. Their assertion that everyone thought Donald Trump's actions were totally appropriate, including people in this room, is of course untrue. It is also dangerous. And that's why members of Congress and U.S. senators, former and current administration officials, state and local officials, all unequivocally confirmed what we witnessed with our own eyes, that Donald Trump's conduct was wrong, it was destructive, dishonorable, and un-American. President Trump's lack of remorse and refusal to take accountability during the attack shows his state of mind. It shows that he intended the events of January 6th to happen. And when it did, he delighted in it. President Trump's lack of remorse and refusal to take accountability after the attack poses its own unique and continuing danger. It sends the message that it is acceptable to incite a violent insurrection to overthrow the will of the people, and that a president of the United States can do that and get away with it. That is why we have to hold President Trump accountable, to send the message that it is never patriotic to incite a violent attack against our nation's capital, and that future presidents will know that they cannot follow in Donald Trump's footsteps and get away with it. So let's start with the day of the attack. On Insurrection Day, January 6th, President Trump did not once condemn the attack, not even once. Even when he finally asked the violent extremists to go home, which was 3 hours after the attack began, he sends this video, and he ends it with, "You're very special. We love you." That was his message to people who perpetrated this violent, gruesome attack. We love you. And then 2 hours later, he tweets, "Remember this day forever." This is not a man who showed remorse. But it's worse than that. After that tweet, it took him another full day to even condemn the attack itself. The very next day, President Trump was eerily silent. And then at 7:01 p.m., he releases a pre-recorded video. And there, President Trump, for the first time, nearly 30 hours after the attack began, acknowledges and condemns the violence and mayhem that occurred. He said the demonstrators defiled the seed of American democracy. He said that these demonstrators didn't represent this country, and if they broke the law, they would pay. But even in that video, he says more lies. He says in that very same video that he immediately deployed the National Guard. That again is not true. The National Guard was not deployed until over 2 hours after the attack began at around 3 p.m. Because of this late deployment, the National Guard did not arrive until after 5 p.m. And when the Guard was deployed, the Pentagon had released a statement that showed the list of people, and you saw that list, of folks that were consulted before deploying the National Guard. Several people were on that list, including the Vice President. President Trump was not on that list. And you know, as a veteran, I find it deeply dishonorable that our Commander-in-Chief did not protect us. And then later, he tries to take credit for something he failed to do. Shameful. Also in that video, you should know what it did not say. Absent from that entire video was any actual acceptance of responsibility for his actions. Absent from that video was a call to his most fervent supporters to never do this again. And here was his final message in that so-called condemnation of attack video. Here's what he actually said.
And to all of my wonderful supporters, I know you are disappointed, but I also want you to know that our incredible journey is only just beginning.
President Trump not only failed to show remorse or take accountability, he made clear he is just beginning. For days, he did not address the nation after this attack. We needed our Commander-in-Chief to lead, to unite a grieving country, to comfort us. But what did President Trump do? Nothing. Silence. We're all aware that a violent mob murdered a police officer. It took President Trump 3 days before he lowered the flag of the United States of America. 3 days. And President Trump, who was Commander-in-Chief at the time, did not attend and pay respects to the officer who lay in state in the very building that he died defending. Now, some people have argued that President Trump made a mistake, that he gets a mulligan. But we know President Trump didn't make a mistake. Because you see, when you or I make a mistake and something very bad happens, we would show remorse. We would accept responsibility. President Trump didn't do any of that. Why not? Because he intended what happened on January 6th. And how do we know that? He told us. On January 12th, as President Trump was boarding Air Force One to head to Texas, and you saw this video before, and I'm going to show it again, he was asked by a reporter, quote, "What is your role in what happened at the Capitol? What is your personal responsibility?" And this was his response.
My speech and my words and my final paragraph, my final sentence, and everybody to the T thought it was totally appropriate.
On January 12th, President Trump had seen the violent attack on the Capitol. He knew the people that died. And his message to all of us was that his conduct was totally appropriate. I'm a former prosecutor, and we're trained to recognize lack of remorse. But it doesn't take a prosecutor to understand that President Trump was not showing remorse. He was showing defiance. He was telling us that he would do this again, that he could do this again, that he and future presidents can run for national election, lose the election, inflame the supporters for months, and then incite an insurrection, and that would be totally appropriate. 1 week after the attack on January 13th, President Trump, in response to continuing bipartisan criticism, releases another video. Here's part of what he said. "I want to be very clear. I unequivocally condemn the violence that we saw last week. Violence and vandalism have absolutely no place in our country and no place in our movement." President Trump, of course, had to make that statement. He needed to unequivocally condemn the attack. But he also needed to mean those words. You saw Donald Trump tweet endless attacks, sometimes 108 tweets in a day, and in public speeches and across rallies, repeating words of fight and stop the steal and never surrender. You know what it looks like when President Trump wants to convey a message. Forcefully, loudly, and repeatedly, he does that. This video sent after a week of the attack was not that. And we know this because in this video, he again does not show remorse, does not take responsibility. He again does not acknowledge his role in the insurrection. He does not say in that video, for example, "Everything I said in the months prior went too far." And he does not say the one sentence that matters. He does not say the one sentence that would stop future political violence. The election was not stolen. He still hasn't said that sentence. That is why National Guard troops in full body armor still patrol outside. Reports from the White House also confirm that President Trump believed he was, quote, forced by the bipartisan fear after the insurrection to acknowledge the new administration. We know he did not stand behind his belated condemnation because those around him confirmed it. And behind closed doors, sources confirmed that President Trump still refused to directly acknowledge his election loss to Joe Biden and refused to even attend the peaceful transition of power, the first president in modern history. President Trump even reportedly, while watching the impeachment vote, quote, focused his ire on the Republicans who voted for his impeachment, peppering aides with questions about what he could do to exact revenge. President Trump has made clear that if he is not held accountable, he will not be accountable. He will not stop. Now, President Trump would have his base in the world believe that his conduct was totally appropriate. It is important to impeach that falsehood, to make clear to his supporters and everyone watching that what Donald Trump did was not acceptable. In fact, quite the opposite. People in his own party, state officials, former officials, current officials, members of Congress, have all unambiguously and passionately said that what Donald Trump did was, quote, disgraceful, shameful, and they've called his behavior existential and wrong. And they said that his actions gave rise to one of the darkest chapters in United States history. Let's hear what some of these officials had to say. Here are Governors Spencer Cox, Charlie Baker, Mike DeWine, Larry Hogan, and Phil Scott.
People have to be held accountable, and yes, that includes the president.
It's important to remember that they were the culmination of months of President Trump repeating over and over again that the American electoral system is a fraud. After he stoked the flames of outrage for weeks leading up to the events of yesterday, he refused to adequately prepare the U.S. Capitol for the possibility of violence and left it nearly defenseless. His remarks during and after the travesty of the attack on the Capitol were disgraceful.
President Trump's continued refusal to accept the election results without producing credible evidence of a rigged election has started a fire that has threatened to burn down our democracy. This incendiary speech yesterday, when he gave preceding the march that he gave to the protesters, served only to fan those flames.
I proudly stood by my father's side at age 12 on the floor of the House chamber as we both took the oath of office, an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. It's clear to me that President Trump has abandoned this sacred oath.
Seeing our Capitol, a symbol of democracy around the world, stormed by an angry mob was heartbreaking. And let me be clear, these actions were not patriotic, and these people are not patriots. The fact that these flames of hate and insurrection were lit by the President of the United States will be remembered as one of the darkest chapters in our nation's history.
One of the darkest chapters in our nation's history. Former members of the Trump administration, long-standing Republicans, also made clear that President Trump incited this insurrection and it went against our democracy. The president's former Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, declared that today's violent assault on our Capitol, an effort to subjugate American democracy by mob rule, was fomented by Mr. Trump. Former White House Chief of Staff John Kelly also spoke on this as well, and I'd like to play an audio clip of what he said.
What happened on Capitol Hill yesterday is a direct result of his poisoning the minds of people with the lies and the frauds.
If you couldn't hear that, what John Kelly said about President Trump was that what happened on Capitol Hill was a direct result of him poisoning the minds of people with their lies and their fraud. Former Speaker of the House, John Boehner, declared that, quote, the invasion of our Capitol by a mob, incited by lies from some entrusted with power, is a disgrace to all who sacrificed to build our republic. This was echoed by former Trump official after former Trump official. Here is what former National Security Advisors John Bolton and H.R. McMaster, former White House Communications Director Alyssa Farah, and former Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney said.
Let me just ask you, do you think President Trump has blood on his hands?
I think he does. Look, I agree with Bill Barr. I think he did incite this mob with the clear intention of having them disrupt the Electoral College certification and delay it to give him more time. I don't think there's any question about it.
There are many reasons for this assault on the Capitol, but foremost among them was the president's exhortations, was the president's sustained disinformation. We've seen a president stoking fears amidst these crises.
First and foremost, I want to say that what happened at the Capitol was unacceptable, un-American, undemocratic.
I think everybody recognizes that what happened on Wednesday is different. You could go down the long
litany of things that people complained about with Donald Trump, and I could probably defend almost all of them. Many of them were policy differences. Many of them were stylistic differences. But Wednesday was different. Wednesday was existential. Wednesday is one of those things that struck to the very heart of what it means to be an American, and it was wrong.
Mick Mulvaney, President Trump's former chief of staff, is clearly saying what we all felt, that January 6th was different. It was existential. It was wrong. It was un-American. And this sentiment was echoed not just from people outside the administration, but from people inside the Trump administration. Perhaps most telling was the flood of resignations from people inside President Trump's administration with firsthand access to President Trump. His own officials felt so betrayed by his conduct that numerous officials resigned in protest days before the end of President Trump's term. 16 officials resigned in protest. 16. They all took this dramatic action of resigning because they saw the clear link between President Trump's conduct and the violent insurrection. Here are some of what they said. Secretary DeVos, who was in administration the entire term, told President Trump in her resignation letter that, quote, "There is no mistaking the impact your rhetoric had on the situation, and it is an inflection point for me." Secretary Chow, who was in administration their entire term, explained, "Yesterday, our country experienced a traumatic and entirely avoidable event as supporters of the president stormed the Capitol building following a rally he addressed. As I'm sure is the case with many of you, it has deeply troubled me in a way I simply cannot set aside." Deputy Costello told his associates the attack was his, quote, breaking point, and he hoped, quote, a wake-up call. These rebukes and resignations from President Trump's own administration make clear that President Trump's
Congressman Ted Lieu is building the case against Donald Trump before the United States Senate. We'll continue with our live coverage.
They also remind us that this can and must be a wake-up call. As Representative Fred Upton so eloquently put it, President Trump expressed no regrets for last week's violent insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. This sends exactly the wrong signal to those of us who support the very core of our democratic principles and took a solemn oath to the Constitution. It is time to say, enough is enough. Now, no one is saying here that President Trump cannot contest the election. Of course he can. But what President Trump did, as his former chief of staff explained, was different. It was dishonorable, it was un-American, and it resulted in fatalities. President Trump spent months inflaming his supporters, spread lies to incite a violent attack on our Capitol, on our law enforcement, and on all of us. And then he lied again to his base to tell them that this was all okay, that this was all acceptable. And that is why President Trump is so dangerous. Because he would have all of us, all Americans, believe that any president who comes after him can do exactly the same thing. That's why lack of remorse is an important factor in impeachment. Because impeachment, conviction, and disqualification is not just about the past, it's about the future. It's making sure that no future official, no future president does the same exact thing President Trump does. President Trump's lack of remorse shows that he will undoubtedly cause future harm if allowed, because he still refuses to account for his previous high-grade crime against our government. You know, I'm not afraid of Donald Trump running again in 4 years. I'm afraid he's going to run again and lose, because he can do this again. We're in an unusual situation, because despite President Trump's claim that everyone thinks what he did was fine, So many have come out and spoken so strongly and passionately about what happened here. I'd like to highlight a statement by Representative Anthony Gonzalez. He said, "The Vice President and both chambers of Congress had their lives put in grave danger as a result of the President's actions and the events leading up to and on January 6th. During the attack itself, the President abandoned his post while many members asked for help, thus further endangering all present. These are fundamental threats not just to people's lives, but to the very foundation of our republic." And now I'd like to show what members of Congress said leading up to the most bipartisan impeachment vote in U.S. history. Because I do want everyone watching, especially President Trump's supporters, to see firsthand what I believe we all feel, that what President Trump did was not appropriate, that it was not American, and that it absolutely cannot stand.
What he has done and what he has caused here is something that we've never seen before in our history.
All indications are that the president has become unmoored, not just from his duty, nor even his oath, but from reality itself.
The president's role in this insurrection is undeniable, both on social media ahead of January 6th and in his speech that day. He deliberately promoted baseless theories, creating a combustible environment of misinformation and division. To allow the President of the United States to incite this attack without consequences is a direct threat to the future of this democracy.
After this trial, I hope you will come together and cast your vote and make absolutely clear how we as a Congress and as a nation feel about what Donald Trump did by convicting him, and to prevent this from being only the beginning, as President Trump said, and to deter future presidents who do not like the outcome of a national election from believing they can follow in President Trump's footsteps. It is what our Constitution requires. It is what our country deserves.
Representative DeGette will now return to show how extremists were emboldened by the insurrection and plan to attack the inauguration.
Diana DeGette, she's coming back to speak to continue the prosecution.
The overwhelming evidence of how President Trump's conduct assembled, incited, and inflamed the mob. We showed how and why this attack, this violence, was not only foreseeable, but preventable. We showed that President Trump knew his conduct could and would result in violence, and that when the attack occurred, he did not fulfill his duty as commander-in-chief and defend us. Instead, he was delighted. Donald Trump incited a violent insurrection, and he failed to defend our nation, our Capitol, this Congress, and our law enforcement from the attack he incited. Now I want to turn to the impact, the long-term harm of this conduct. My colleagues and I will walk through the breadth and gravity of this harm. I'd like to start with the effect President Trump's conduct had on our domestic security. We saw firsthand how Donald Trump's conduct emboldened and escalated domestic violence extremists. These folks are known in the law enforcement community as DVEs. These threats were and are made worse by President Trump's refusal to take accountability and his refusal to forcibly denounce what his own FBI identified as some of the most dangerous elements of our country. Even as the attack was underway, he tweeted words of support to his violent supporters. And then, in the aftermath on January 7th, President Trump made it clear This was only the beginning.
And to all of my wonderful supporters, I know you are disappointed, but I also want you to know that our incredible journey is only just beginning.
And he was right. Unless we take action, the violence is only just beginning. In the aftermath of the attack, we saw a huge rise in threats from domestic violent extremists, including specific threats to the inauguration in D.C. and also to all 50 state capitals. Our intelligence agencies confirmed that in addition to these specific threats, President Trump's conduct emboldened the very same violent groups who initiated the attack and sparked new violent coalitions. These groups believe that they're following his orders. They believe that their acts of insurrection and violence are patriotic. Violence is never patriotic, and it's never American. It's not the Democratic way, and it's not the Republican way. After the attack, the nation's top defense and law enforcement agencies reported an increase in credible threats to the inauguration from Donald Trump's supporters. On January 13, 2021, a joint intelligence bulletin issued by the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, and the National Counterterrorism Center found, quote, since the 6th January event, violent online rhetoric regarding the 20 January presidential inauguration has increased, with some calling for unspecified, quote, justice for the 6th January fatal shooting by law enforcement of a participant who had illegally entered the Capitol building, and another posting that, quote, many armed individuals would return on 19 January. The agencies also made clear why these threats were escalating, especially regarding the inauguration. The report explained that a primary motivating factor was, quote, the shared false narrative of a stolen election and opposition to the change in control of the executive and legislative branches of the federal government may lead some individuals to adopt the belief that there is no political solution to address their grievances and that violent action is necessary. In other words, President Trump's spreading of inflammatory disinformation about the election incited the insurrection on January 6th and may lead to further violence. Online, just as they did prior to the January 6th attack, Trump supporters took to the internet to organize and document their desire and plans for future violence at President Biden's inauguration. And indeed, in the days shortly after the attack, several posters on extremist social media websites made further plans for violence. They posted, quote, many of us will return on January 19, 2021, carrying our weapons in support of our nation's resolve, to which the world will never forget. We will come in numbers no standing army or police agency can match. Quote, we took the building once and we can take it again. Other users, eager to participate in additional attacks, confirmed that they were waiting on President Trump's instructions about what to do next. Referring to a future planned attack, a user on the online platform known as Gab posted, quote, I'd like to come do this, but want to know, does our president want us there? Awaiting instructions. In fact, in the days leading up to the inauguration, multiple individuals, many potentially in an attempt to carry out the plots that I just previewed, were arrested in Washington, D.C., including on serious weapons charges. One of those men was Couy Griffin, the founder of Cowboys for Trump, who took part in the Capitol attack and was also arrested on January 17th. Here's what he said about his plans for violence.
You know, you want to say that that was a mob? You want to say that was a violence? No, sir. No, ma'am. No, we could have a Second Amendment rally on those same steps that we had that rally yesterday. You know, and if we do, then it's going to be a sad day because there's going to be blood running out of that building. But at the end of the day, you mark my word, we will plant our flag on the desk of Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer.
Blood running out of the building, this building, the Capitol, where all of us are right now. Now, the name Couy Griffin may sound familiar because he previously faced controversy for a May 2020 video where he said, quote, "The only good Democrat is a dead Democrat." Hear it from him yourself.
Where I've come to the conclusion that the only good Democrat is a dead Democrat.
Now, when he said this, President Trump actually retweeted Griffin and thanked him for that sentiment. When Donald Trump retweeted this, he was no stranger to Griffin. In fact, in March 2019, over a year earlier, Griffin and Trump had spoken on the phone for nearly 30 minutes. President Trump's conduct, without a doubt, made it clear that he supported Griffin. In fact, Griffin even said so himself. As Griffin later said about President Trump retweeting his inflammatory comment about the dead Democrats, quote, "It really means a lot to me because I know the President of the United States has my back." Remember, this is a man who was here on January 6th, who was arrested after threatening to come back here to make blood come running out of this building. Threats like Griffin's have triggered a deployment of forces, the likes of which we have never seen. There were approximately 25,000 National Guard troops brought in from around the country to protect D.C. leading up to and on Inauguration Day. As you know, many of those troops are still here. Take a look at that. These were scenes that played out all over the country. 5 days following the siege on the Capitol, on January 11, 2021, the FBI warned that, quote, "Armed protests are being planned at all 50 state capitals from 16 January through at least 20 January, and at the U.S. Capitol from 17 January through 20 January. As a result, at least 21 states activated their National Guards in preparation for potential attacks." President Trump's incitement has reverberated around the country, prompting massive law enforcement mobilization in several state capitals, including Washington, Illinois, Michigan, and Georgia. Look at these photos. This is what Donald Trump has done to America. This massive deployment of law enforcement has cost the taxpayers dearly. The National Guard deployment to D.C. alone is expected to cost at least $480 million. The bills are already also racking up in the states. North Carolina, South Carolina, Pennsylvania, Utah, and Wisconsin have each spent about $500,000 to safeguard their capitals in the run-up to the inauguration. Ohio spent $1.2 million over the same 2-week period. And remember, this is at a time when state budgets are already suffering under the weight of the pandemic. Our brave service members showed up. Thanks to their dedication and their vigilance, the inauguration and the days leading up to it mercifully proceeded without incident. In fact, after news broke of law enforcement's preparedness for further attacks, leaders of the Proud Boys, the 3%ers militia, the organizers of the Million MAGA March, they all now told their followers to avoid protests up to or leading up to the inauguration for fear law enforcement would crush them and arrest rioters who showed up. Thank God there wasn't an insurrection sequel here on January 20th. But look at the price we've paid. The price that we're still paying. It's not just dollars and cents. This Capitol has become a fortress, as state capitals have all across the country. Our constituents no longer have access to the elected representatives. Every Democrat and Republican, including people who came here on January 6th peacefully, is paying the price. And it's not just a loss of access. It's a dimming of their freedom. It's a dimming of all of our freedom. We must uphold our oaths, as the tens of thousands of law enforcement officers have done in the wake of January 6th. Because if we do not, President Trump's mob stands ready for more attacks. Now, this should be no surprise. Having a commander-in-chief who incites violence has given life to the existing violent groups he spent years cultivating and has inspired new coalitions among extremist groups who actually view January as a success. According to the FBI, President Trump's assemblage of his mob was particularly dangerous because, quote, in-person engagement between DVEs of differing ideological goals during the Capitol breach likely served to foster connections which may increase DVE's willingness, capability, and motivation to attack and undermine a government they view as illegitimate. In other words, they all got to talking to each other. This bulletin by our own Intelligence Committee was also confirmed by concrete evidence. Rioters celebrated their roles in the January 6th attack on social media. They boasted about their success in breaching the Capitol and forcing members of Congress and the Vice President to evacuate. Take, for example, right-wing provocateur Nick Fuentes. The day before the Capitol insurrection, Fuentes said this on his internet show.
What can you and I do to a state legislature besides kill him? Although we should not do that. I'm not advising that, but I mean, what else can you do, right?
Fuentes was at the Capitol on January 6th and praised the insurrection on a live stream as glorious and awe-inspiring. He later said, quote, "We forced a joint session of Congress and the Vice President to evacuate because Trump supporters were banging down and then successfully burst through the doors." Fuentes was not the only provocateur to revel in the violence. According to Mike Dunn, a member of the Boogaloo Boys, an anti-government movement whose adherents helped to lead multiple groups in storming the Capitol, the Boogaloo Boys will be, quote, working overtime to capitalize on the January 6th riots and hope it will lead to more action. They said, quote, just know there's more to come. Proud Boys members were bragging about the attack on the Capitol. One post on the Proud Boys Telegram channel said, people saw what we can do. They know what we're up to. They know and they want in. The leader of the Proud Boys himself sent the same message. Enrique Tarrio said the Proud Boys would be active during Biden's presidency. Tarrio stated, "You're definitely going to see more of us." Extremist groups are also boasting that the attack on our Capitol is a boon for their recruitment efforts. 3% Security Force leader Chris Hill says he's been contacted by several people interested in joining since the insurrection. And as one expert who focuses on domestic extremism, Jared Holt, explained, by all measurable effects, this was a far-right extremist, one of the most successful attacks that they've ever launched. They're talking about this as the first stab in a greater revolution. And as indicated by Mr. Holt, their perceived success has given them encouragement to continue and to escalate attacks. Intelligence agencies have also noted that these extremist groups will, unfortunately, be targeting vulnerable minority communities in the U.S. A January 27, 2021 DHS bulletin warned, quote, long-standing ethnic tension of the sort that led to a man killing 23 people at an El Paso Walmart will continue to grow and motivate further attacks. The January 13 Joint Intelligence Bulletin report stated that in addition to the other types of violence listed, DVEs may be incited to carry out more violence, including violence against racial, ethnic, and religious minorities and associated institutions, journalists, members of the LGBTQ+ community, and other targets common among some DVEs. These prejudiced elements could be seen visibly in the crowd that attacked the Capitol. Pictured here is Robert Packer. Robert Packer is an avowed white supremacist and Holocaust denier who proudly wore that sweatshirt which states, quote, Camp Auschwitz. These prejudiced elements could also be heard from the crowds. As you've heard, the insurrectionists that attacked the Capitol on January 6th hurled racial slurs, including at black police officers. One officer described the trauma he experienced when the rioters seized the Capitol. He said, quote, I'm a black officer. There was a lot of racism that day. I was called racial slurs, and in the moment, I didn't process this as traumatic. I was just trying to survive. I just wanted to get home, to see my daughter again. I couldn't show weakness. I finally reached a safe place, surrounded by officers. I was able to cry, to let it out, to attempt to process it. These extremist groups were emboldened because President Trump told them repeatedly that their insurrectionist activities were the pinnacle of patriotism. Well, let today be the day that we reclaim the definition of patriotism. Impeachment is not to punish, but to prevent. We are not here to punish Donald Trump. We are here to prevent the seeds of hatred that he planted from bearing any more fruit. As my colleagues showed, this was not the first time that President Trump inspired violence, but it must be the last time that he's given a platform to do so. This must be our wake-up call. We must condemn it because the threat is not over. President Trump refused to condemn this type of violence. Instead, over and over again, he's encouraged it. Our response must be different this time. We simply cannot sweep this under the rug. We must take a united stand, all of us, that this is not American. Think back to August 2017, when a young woman was murdered during a white supremacist rally in Charlottesville, West Virginia. Her name was Heather Heyer. Her mother's name is Susan Breaux. Ms. Breaux has been a steadfast advocate for her daughter's memory. In a 2018 interview, she expressed concern that people had rushed too quickly to reconciliation without accountability.
If you rush to heal, if you rush to everybody grab each other and sing Kumbaya, then we've accomplished nothing, and we'll be right back here in a few years.
We will be right back here in a few years. Those were her words in 2018, 3 years ago. Her daughter's murderer, he was held to account. But our nation did not impose any meaningful accountability on a president who at the time said that there were very fine people on both sides. And now where are we 3 years later? I'd argue we're not just back where we were. I would argue things are worse. In 2017, it was unfathomable to most of us to think that Charlottesville could happen, just as it was unfathomable to most of us that the Capitol could have been breached on January 6th. Frankly, what unfathomable horrors await us if we do not stand up now and say, no, it's not America. And we will not just express condolences and denunciations. We won't just close the book and try to move on. We will act to make sure this never happens again.
Representatives
Ted
Cicilline
Lieu,
and
Congressman
Lieu will
Ted
now
Lieu from
come to
California
show
speak.
the harm done and the damage done to Congress and our democratic process. Mr. Cicilline.
Making the case for the conviction of Donald Trump before the United States Senate.
Mr. President, distinguished senators, you just heard from my colleague, Manager DeGette, how the conduct of Donald Trump dramatically increased the threats to our security and emboldened violent domestic extremists. I'd like to now turn to the harm that was caused here, inside these walls, as a result of the conduct on January 6th. The harm to us, to Congress, to those who serve our country, and to the constitutional processes as the Trump mob tried to stop the election certification process. The attack on January 6th was one of the bloodiest intrusions in the Capitol since the British invaded in the War of 1812 and burned it to the ground. And you've heard in painstaking detail that the president's mob posed an immediate and serious threat to the continuity and constitutional succession of the United States government. As the first, second, and third in line to the presidency, the vice president, the Speaker of the House, the president pro tem, were all together and faced a common threat in the same location. And we've seen the first and the second were purposely targeted by these attackers. These weren't idle threats. The mob, as you have heard, chanted, "Hang Mike Pence."
David Cicilline laying out the case.
The rioters said they would have killed Vice President Pence and Speaker Pelosi had they found them. Dawn Bancroft and Diane Santos Smith, two of the rioters charged in the attack, were caught on tape discussing the brutal violence that they hoped to inflict on Speaker Pelosi had she not been rushed out to safety. They said, quote, "We broke into the Capitol. We got inside. We did our part. We were looking for Nancy to shoot her in the frigging brain, but we didn't find her," end quote. Senators, simply put, this mob was trying to overthrow our government. And they came perilously close to reaching the first three people in line to the presidency. It wasn't just the vice president and the speaker. Rioters were prepared to attack any member of Congress they found. Thomas Edward Caldwell, Donovan Ray Kroll, and Jessica Marie Watkins, three militia members, were also charged for their role in the attack. They discussed trapping us inside the underground tunnels. The indictment quotes social media chatter with Caldwell, quote, "All members are in the tunnel under Capitol. Seal them in. Turn on gas. All legislators are down in the tunnels, 3 floors down. Do like we had to do when I was in the Corps and start tearing out floors, go from top to bottom," end quote. Never did any of us imagine that we or our colleagues would face mortal peril by a mob riled up by the President of the United States, the leader of the free world. But we did. All because Donald Trump could not accept his election defeat. Trump chose himself above the people, above our institutions, above our democracy, above all of you. You know, we've heard Trump espouse for years now this America First policy. But his true North Star isn't America's well-being. It's not country first like our dear departed colleague John McCain. No, his perspective is Trump first. No matter the cost, no matter the threat to our democracy. But each and every one of us in this room must agree on one thing. We can never allow the kind of violent attack that occurred on January 6th to ever happen again in this country. In the immediate aftermath, we heard really disturbing accounts from many members of Congress about what they experienced that day. Here are some of those reactions. Following the attack, Representative Dusty Johnson expressed concerns that we had gotten to the point where so many of us had sown the seeds of anger and division.
We were barricaded, and there was some fear, to be sure, but overwhelmingly the emotion that I experienced was one of anger. I just could not believe that this was happening. I could not believe that we had gotten to this point where so many of us had sown these seeds of anger and of division, and we had built this powder keg, and really we were starting to see this powder keg light up, and it was, frankly, I was furious.
Representative Jason Crow compared the events of this day to his time in Afghanistan as an Army Ranger, something Senator Reid knows something about.
What I felt in the Capitol behind us is something that I haven't felt since I was in Afghanistan as an Army Ranger. And to think that as a member of Congress in 2021, in the U.S. Capitol on the House floor, that I was preparing to fight my way out of the People's House against a mob is just beyond troubling.
Representative Pat Fallon was humbled by his experience on January 6th and described the events as surreal as they unfolded here in the Capitol.
It was something that I just never thought I'd see this in our nation's capital, and particularly in the House chamber. It was surreal when it was unfolding. Well, you know, what was interesting was the bravery and the courage of some of my fellow members. When we got to a point where the mob was banging on the doors, and all that kept them from reaching the chamber itself was the doors and then some furniture that we had moved and some Capitol Police, and they needed to be augmented. And so Tony Gonzalez, a new freshman rep from Texas, and Ronnie Jackson and Troy Nels and Mark Wayne Mullen stepped in, and we broke off furniture. Some of the hand sanitizer stations are on these big giant poles, wooden poles, and we turned them upside down, and we were ready to actually have to street fight in the House chamber. It was unbelievable.
Many members that day wondered if they would ever see their families again. As the rioters breached the Capitol and they were outnumbered and trapped inside, they were calling loved ones to say goodbye. Representative Dan Kildee was one of them. Listen to how he described the impact of the riot on him.
I was laying on the floor, trying to, protect myself behind this little wall. And, we all took our pins off because we, were certain that if this mob were to come in, that would not be a good thing for them to quickly, easily be able to identify us as members of Congress. And I called my wife, and, it wasn't until I heard her voice that I thought, wow, this is like one of those calls you hear about.
While most coverage is focused on the extreme danger posed to members and the Capitol Police who were targets of this attack, there were lots of other people in the Capitol working on January 6th as well. From personal aides to floor employees, cleaning staff, food service workers. We can't forget all the people that were in harm's way that day. These employees experienced trauma, some cowered, hiding in places just feet away from where this rabid crowd had assembled. Many were just kids, 20-somethings, who came here to work because they believed in their country and they believed in working to make it better. Others were dedicated food and service workers, all who work incredibly hard to make sure that we can come here and do our jobs. These workers are the lifeblood of the legislative branch. They deserved better. You've already heard from Speaker Pelosi's staff, the staff that was hiding under the conference table, cowering in the dark, making sure that the attackers couldn't hear them. But I'd like to share with you what some other staffers went through. Listen as two staffers recall what they experienced that day.
But then we were seeing on Twitter, on our phones, and then and hearing from some of the police officers on the floor that the building had been breached. Building breached. Those were two words I had never heard.
That was particularly stressful, being in a room close to where things are happening and not really knowing what was happening, and seeing it come in live, and getting texts from people, are you okay? And truthfully, I didn't know what was happening. I heard shots fired, shots fired, shots fired, show me your hands, show me your hands. Then I did not know if they were right outside, if they were lots of people with weapons, if there were one shooter, if they had, I didn't know what it looked like. I just knew that there were shots fired outside of the House chamber.
According to reports, one Republican Senate staffer whose office was not far from the floor, quote, took a steel rod and barricaded his door as the rioters banged on his door trying to break in. The New York Times also reported that a senior black staffer was under lockdown for 6 hours during the insurrection, was so disturbed about these events that she quit her job. Another staffer who was on the floor of the House that day described that what happened on January 6th still echoes in his mind. Listen to him describe the moments just before this indelible image.
I heard glass break, and I could see the window panes on the house main door start to pop. And I figured that, obviously I knew they were at the door, and they figured out a way to break the glass. And the last thing I remember before I walked off the floor was several of the police officers had drawn guns and had their guns trained on the door. Clearly that was, I didn't think there was anything else I could do, and I didn't want to be there for whatever was about to occur. So I got to the top of the stairs. The stairway was pretty packed, and right about that point, I don't know whether it was a police officer or somebody else said, they're right behind us, run. For me, the thing that I keep thinking about, and again, there isn't a day that
Oh, okay. We just, apparently we just lost the video of, and the audio, frankly, of what's going on. And while Nate is working to get that back up, I'll give you a recap. Essentially what we're finding, what we're hearing, and David Cicilline is the person who's speaking right now, and we'll get back to him as soon as we possibly can. But the case that they have been laying out, it started yesterday with the really the day before yesterday, arguably, but it started with the beginning, with Donald Trump telling this big lie, and then they kind of backfilled. They went back and they said, and this has been going on for 4 years, that he's been setting this thing up. And then part of the today, and in fact the earlier part of today that I thought was really, really powerful, was making the argument that Donald Trump has been fine-tuning this pitch for at least a year, and arguably longer than that, of how specifically to activate a mob, how specifically to get these people to go absolutely nuts. Trump has been working on this. Trump has been tweaking it. The siege of the Capitol in Michigan was a major milestone in that process and was essentially a dress rehearsal for what happened on January 6th in Washington, D.C. So now the point that they're making is that not only did he call them out, not only did they hear that call and respond as he expected, but that here we are months later and he's still looking back at that as, gee, almost became, we almost killed Pence. I mean, they're not literally saying that, but this is how I'm taking it. Anyhow, we'll be back. We're hitting the top of the hour here. We'll be back with more of the House impeachment hearings in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Plexiderm, real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. Gabby takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at gabby.com/Tom. HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. And Superbeats, heart chews for heart healthy energy. More info at superbeatsradio.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
We're reading today from Truth in Our Times by David E. McCraw, Deputy General Counsel of the New York Times, the #2 lawyer for the New York Times. This is from Chapter 1, titled Election Day. It opens with a tweet from Donald Trump. The failing New York Times has been wrong about me from the very beginning. Sadly, I would lose the primaries. Oh, said I would lose the primaries on the general election. Fake news. November 8, 2016. At 10 p.m., I made one last circuit of the newsroom. Our CEO, Mark Thompson, stood near the political desk, looking on with his wife and a small group of others connected somehow to the Times.
You
Pennsylvania,
remember
Wisconsin, and
what
Michigan
happened to
remained in
Officer
doubt, but the
Fanone
reality
and
was
Officer
sinking
Hodges
in.
of the MPD.
Donald Trump was on the verge of
There were
winning the
scores
American
of other
presidency.
officers whose names we don't know who were also brutalized that day. Injuries to the U.S. Capitol Police and the Metropolitan Police Department include concussions, irritated lungs, serious injuries caused by repeated blows from bats, holes, and clubs. Capitol Police officers also sustained injuries that will be with them for the rest of their lives. One officer lost the tip of a right index finger. In a statement issued on January 7th, the chairman of the Capitol Police Officers Union said, and I quote, "I have officers who were not issued helmets prior to the attack, who have sustained brain injuries. One officer has 2 cracked ribs and 2 smashed spinal discs. One officer is going to lose his eye, and another was stabbed with a metal fence stake," end quote. In total, at least 81 members of Capitol Police and 65 members of the Metropolitan Police Department were injured during the attack on January 6th. Former Capitol Police Chief Son described the insurrection as violent, unlike anything he'd seen in his 30-year career in law enforcement. D.C. Police Chief Robert J. Conti III, who had spoken with an officer who had been beaten and injured with a stun gun, said, quote, "I've talked to officers who have done 2 tours in Iraq who said this was scarier to them than their time in combat," end quote. Of course, the physical violence is not the only thing that will have a lasting effect on our brave sworn officers. Trump's mob verbally denigrated their patriotism, questioned their loyalty, and yelled racial slurs. They called them traitors, Nazis, un-American, for protecting us. For example, in the next clip, a rioter wearing a hunting jacket accosts a police officer.
Are you an American? Act like something like you don't even. You don't have no idea what the fuck you're doing. You guys have no idea what the fuck you're doing. Now, once again, we're America. Now, got one idea. Don't touch me, bro. Get the fuck out of here. Don't touch me, motherfucker. Man. No, they work for us. Fuck that.
Listen to how the Trump mob talked to these officers. You heard that with your own ears.
Fuck you! You're a fucking traitor! You come here, motherfucker! Join us! You're a fucking traitor to your country! Yeah! You're a fucking traitor! Fucking traitor!
Effing traitor. So much for backing the blue. There's a couple more examples. They called law enforcement officers traitors. You have to wonder, who are these rioters sworn to? To whom do they believe the police owe their loyalty? To the people? To the Constitution? To our democracy? Or to Donald Trump? Even those who were not outwardly injured, the mental toll has been significant. Several Capitol Police officers have reportedly threatened self-harm in the days following the riot. And in one case, an officer voluntarily turned in her gun because she was afraid of what might happen. Black police officers were also met with racist vitriol. You heard lead manager Raskin reference a black police officer who, weary from racialized violence that he had experienced that day, saying, "Tears just started streaming down my face. I said, what the F, man? Is this America?" Is this America, lead manager Raskin asked. Is this America? What is your answer to that question? Is this okay? If not, what are we going to do about it? These people matter. These people who risk their lives for us. So I ask you respectfully to consider them, the police officers, the staff of this building, when you cast your vote. These people are in deep pain because they showed up here to serve the American people, to serve their government, to serve all of us. And I ask each of you, when you cast your vote, to remember them and honor them.
A case for the conviction of Donald Trump before the United States
Senate.
Senate.
They deserve. I also want to recognize that 4 individuals, 4 insurrectionists, who also lost their lives during the attack. These people were led here by the words and actions of an individual who made them believe that they were patriots. The loss of human life is, of course, the most consequential. But that was not the only damage wrought that day. The Trump mob also damaged this building. They defiled some of the most sacred places. The Statuary Hall, the Rotunda, where some of America's greatest champions, presidents, Supreme Court justices, civil rights heroes, and other defenders are honored after their death. Trump's violent mob had little respect for this place. This video shows the wreckage left in the Senate parliamentarian's office by the insurrectionists.
think we might have lost our audio again.
A bust of President Zachary Taylor was smeared with what appeared to be blood. An empty picture frame, presumably robbed of its contents, was found on the floor. And videos of the insurrection captured one man stealing a framed photo, another one tearing a scroll from the wall and ripping it up and throwing those pieces on the floor. A sign paying tribute to John Lewis was also shamefully destroyed, and only a broken piece of the memorial was found on the ground next to a trash can. The photo of Mr. Lewis was gone. The damage done to this building is a stain on all of us and on the dignity of our democracy. The attack we saw had a purpose: stop the certification, stop our democratic process. Fortunately, they did not prevail. Newspapers across America on January 21st, the day after the inauguration, proclaimed democracy has prevailed. President Biden said that in his inauguration speech. The headline was in so many places because the world's oldest constitutional democracy and the principles underlying it had been attacked and challenged. This wasn't just an attack on the Capitol building and the dedicated people inside. It was an attack on what we were elected to preserve, our democracy. This attack on our elections, on the peaceful transfer of power from one president to the next, didn't even happen during the Civil War. But it did just happen because of the cold, calculated, and conspiratorial acts of our former president, Donald J. Trump. We showed you that the insurrectionists were deliberate, that they came looking for Vice President Pence and Speaker Pelosi, ready to kill. When President Trump incited a lawless mob to attack our process, he was attacking our democracy. He was trying to become king and rule over us against the will of the people and the valid results of the election. For the first time ever in our history, a sitting president actively instigated his supporters to violently disrupt the process that provides for the peaceful transfer of power from one president to the next. Think about that for a moment. What if President Trump had been successful? What if he had succeeded in overturning the will of the people in our constitutional processes? Who among us is willing to risk that outcome by letting Trump's constitutional crimes go unanswered? The founders included impeachment in our Constitution not as a punishment, but to prevent. We have to prevent every president, today, tomorrow, or any time in the future, from believing that this conduct is acceptable. Today, we have to stand up for our democracy and ensure we remain a country governed by the people, for the people, by telling Donald Trump and people all across this country and all across the world that his crimes will not and cannot stand.
House stand in recess for 15 minutes.
The Senate will stand in recess.
I ask unanimous consent the House stand in recess for 15 minutes.
Without objection, the Senate will stand in recess.
Second, I am back. My apologies. And I am live. And our telephone number is 202-808-9925 if you would like to weigh in with your thoughts on what you've been seeing, what's been going on here. It is 12 minutes past the hour. It's the piece that I put up on Medium today is asking the question, will history judge the Republican senators who vote to normalize Trump's treason And make no mistake about it, that's what they will be voting for if they vote not to convict him. Will history judge them as traitors themselves? I think and then the subtitle is, do they really think a BJ is worse than insurrection? I probably should have given it a somewhat different title and subtitle. It should have been, do Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz plan on following in Trump's footsteps? And if they run for president in 2024, if one of them runs for president in 2024 and loses the election, does that mean that they, explicitly, does that mean that they would sanction the same thing? That they would welcome an insurrection? That they would welcome an attempt to take down the government? Mike in Chicago. Hey, Mike, your thoughts on this?
This was more in regards to what happened yesterday. I forget which senator ended up presenting himself as a witness, but I had read that once they become a witness, they can no longer be a juror, which would obviously eliminate, or actually kind of decrease. I don't think
the rules are not the same in an impeachment that they are in a regular criminal trial, though, Mike.
Well, I mean, I'm going by a source, by who I trust, which is, I assume you do too, is Seth Abramson. That's who said it.
Yeah.
But I was curious.
A witness should not be a juror, but a co-conspirator shouldn't be a juror either. And I think that you could build a fairly strong case that Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz, at the very least, were co-conspirators.
Correct. And that's people what I'm wondering if they're going to be called. If they're going to be called as witnesses, or I assume they're. I don't know.
think the House impeachment managers are planning to call any witnesses. I think that they're using video as their witness testimony. I have not heard about any witnesses being called. So we'll see. Mike, I got to run, but thank you. Thanks for the call. We're hitting a break here. So the Senate is in recess right now. Presumably 10, 15-minute recess. It'll probably turn into 20, 25 minutes. So we have an opportunity here to discuss this. What are your thoughts about it? I've shared many of mine with you. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's a day making history, but I think the larger history is, will the GOP stand up to fascism? We'll be right back. And welcome back. Alfredo in Mountain View, California. Hey, Alfredo, what's on your mind?
Hey, hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call.
Thank you.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Just fine.
Yeah, I am afraid, very afraid, actually, that we already have a fascist government. I mean, the GOP and the Senate and the Republican Senate, they are likely to vote against impeachment. I hope I'm wrong, but if that happens, this is going to set up a really horrible precedent, as you know, and we already have a fascist government, in my opinion.
Well, therefore what? I mean, where are you trying to go with that, Alfredo? Or are you just...
I'm afraid that this guy is going to be, he's going to run again for president, and he's going to be, hopefully not, but get into office. This is going to incite these wacko groups, and I mean, remember, almost half of the population is for Trump. It's pretty scary, very scary stuff.
Yeah. It is, and I wouldn't say that we have a fascist government right now, but Donald Trump was certainly trying to give us one, and if he is not totally, exhaustively, irrefutably, undeniably, completely discredited and locked out of political life going forward, and frankly, I think he should be in prison as well. He's got the deaths of 5 people or more on the blood of those lives on his hands, then I think it's just going to get worse, frankly. I share your concern, Alfredo. Thank you for the. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that you had another word there. Eric in Seattle. Hey, Eric, your thoughts?
Well, I'm actually looking at the 2022 Senate election possibilities, and I'm more concerned about us keeping the majorities, and maybe progressives getting more power then, no matter where this impeachment goes, because it's so political. And what can we do, what are Democrats going to do to make sure they ensure we have the majorities? Because I think then we can do what we need to do.
Well, that's a good question. I'm going to be going off in a day or so on how we actually need to expand the Democrats in the Senate by adding D.C. statehood and Puerto Rican statehood. And frankly, I think the Virgin Islands, the U.S. Virgin Islands, should be a state. But that's going to be a bigger lift. I guarantee you, the Democratic Congressional Senatorial Committee or campaign, whatever it's called, the DSCSC is on this. Did you have a specific race that you were concerned about, Eric?
No, I'm looking at the overall balance. I'm just starting to do some research on it, like who are the people up. I'm glad we don't have to defend any states particularly. But I'm looking at it that when Obama got elected, they kind of let up and thought, things were okay. And I'm hoping that doesn't happen with Biden.
I guarantee you it's not. I mean, the danger right now is that there are, I believe, 11 Democratic senators from Republican-controlled states. And if any of those Democratic senators were to get COVID and, God forbid, die, or just become incapacitated, a Republican governor would appoint their replacement. So that's not a good thing. But, we got to take this step by step. Eric, thanks for the call. You can find an absolutely fascinating library of my writings, including my daily rants, over at thomhartmann.medium.com. In our latest video for folks who support our show over at thomhartmann.com, it's pretty mind-boggling, actually. The candidate Trump back in 2016 said, I'm not going to cut Social Security like every other Republican, and I'm not going to cut Medicare or Medicaid. Every other Republican is going to cut, but I won't. That's what he said. Well, what did his budget actually propose? His budget actually proposed, this is last year's budget. Congress didn't pass it, thank God, but this is what his budget proposed. $1.9 trillion in cuts to Medicare and Medicaid, and $26 billion in cuts to Social Security. And now he is block granting Medicaid to the states, which is already cutting back on Medicaid programs in the red states. You can check it all out over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. 21 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you, and a lot going on. We're seeing we're watching this play out in real time. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, your thoughts on what's going on?
Well, what's occurring to me, Tom, just in retrospect, I'm thinking about in terms of whatever happened to the big lie. And the big lie, we heard that all in these swing states, that these irregularities and all this, it all needs to be investigated. Have you heard of a single state legislature that's investigating the 2020 election? It was 3 months ago, over 3 months ago, going on 4 months ago. And the fact that the thing is, they knew it was a big lie. And the reason they're not investigating it is because once you open an investigation, you have to start logging facts. And what they'd rather do, what the Republicans in these states, because some of these swing states, most of them have Republican legislatures, they would rather just say, yeah, it was a ripoff and it should be investigated, as if someone is stopping them, as if the Democrats are stopping them, so that they can perpetuate the idea that it was stolen. And that's what the Republican Party has turned into. Because when you think about it, there's a test in law called the but-for test. but for the big lie, can you imagine that any of this would have happened, that these people would have showed up and stormed the Capitol? No. It's the but-for test shows that the big lie propagated by Donald Trump, and this is what the impeachment managers have been talking about, that but for the big lie that started really before the election, he set it up, saying that if I lose, it's rigged, and now he lost, and he did that really in 2016. It's always his fail-safe that if I lose, it was rigged. He said that both times, that if it's rigged unless I win. Okay, so This is what you get, and the state legislatures knew it was a lie. The people in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, all of these Republicans, this is part of it. And that's what the last caller had a good point. And I don't know if you don't remember, Tom, but in the days at Michigan State, just after you were there, actually there was a professor there by the name of Kenneth Waltzer who taught in the James Madison College. He was there when you were there, and as I was there about 7 or 8 years later. He said, fascism, don't think it can never happen again. He was an expert on the Holocaust, and he said, this only happened about 20 years before all of you were born. It was happened when your parents were young. He says, don't think it's ancient history and it can't happen again. And he used to go over the qualities of fascism and how it came to rise. And he was right. It can happen again.
And yeah, absolutely. And that's what Donald Trump was trying to bring to us. And with regard to the big lie, this has been the Republican go-to strategy for 30 years now. It's how they have justified increasingly tightening the screws on elections to make it harder and harder and harder, particularly for low-income people to vote. They keep going back to this. And to your point, George W. Bush had a blue ribbon commission. He had, 100 U.S. prosecutors, federal prosecutors all across the country spending 2 years looking for voter fraud. Couldn't find it. Found 31 cases out of 1 billion votes. Donald Trump brought Chris Kobach in and said, okay, this is it. We're going to prove that there's voter fraud that justifies all these draconian laws to prevent people from voting. They couldn't find any of it. You're absolutely right. The big lie is the basis of this entire thing. Paul, thank you for the call. Nicholas in San Cristobal, Mexico. Hey, Nicholas, what's up?
Mr. Hartmann, so many things are up. Very quickly, from where I sit down here in Mexico watching this whole trial going on, one of my first reactions is of extreme embarrassment for the country. I do understand that it's all necessary, and I'm pleased it's happening, of course. But it is an extreme embarrassment to the country as well that it should ever have become necessary that a man like Trump could have ever been allowed anywhere near the Oval Office, much less as president. And secondly, quickly, there's a terrific article in today's New York Times by Martha Crenshaw. She's the professor emerita at both Wesleyan and Stanford and has been studying terrorism, both domestic and international, for, since 1972, I think it is. She has a very disturbing article about how if these senators do not convict, that it will further empower the most deeply rooted of the Trump supporters. And she can document with...
I read it this morning.
Did you read? Yeah. Then you two got what I got from it, that she suggests that the more deeply underground, the most virulent of the Trump supporters are driven, the more dangerous they're capable of becoming, and that's when they become the lone wolf kind of terrorists who are not controlled either by the group to which they subscribe, et cetera, et cetera. I found that to be quite alarming, and I think that if we do not see a conviction, and I suspect we're not going to, that would be my great fear, that this is going to happen. By the way, I just bought another copy of Sinclair Lewis's It Can't Happen Here, because I thought it was time to reread it after about, 30, 40 years. And
good old Buzz Winthrop
said it can happen again. It can easily happen again. We're not finished with this.
No, we're not, and we were just a whisker away from the United States flipping into full-blown fascism before the election. I mean, it's just, and had the election gone the other way, we would be there. We would be a fascist state right now. Nicholas, thank you so much for your call. It's good to hear from you. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
By the way, just a heads up, particularly to our program directors around the country, it looks like Portland might get a foot of snow tomorrow, so heads up. We'll be back. Our book today is The We're reading today from Truth in Our Times by David E. McCraw, Deputy General Counsel of the New York Times, the number 2 lawyer for the New York Times. This is from Chapter 1, titled Election Day. It opens with a tweet from Donald Trump. The failing New York Times has been wrong about me from the very beginning. Sadly, I would lose the primaries. Oh, said I would lose the primaries on the general election. Fake news. November 8, 2016. At 10 p.m., I made one last circuit of the newsroom. Our CEO, Mark Thompson, stood near the political desk, looking on with his wife and a small group of others connected somehow to the Times. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan remained in doubt, but the reality was sinking in. Donald Trump was on the verge of winning the American presidency. I'd been in newsrooms on election nights before. I know how it's supposed to be. The only thing that ever mattered was the horse race, think Gore-Bush, or the historic moment, think Obama-McCain. There was no investment in which candidate was winning. He or she was destined to disappoint in the long run. And the dominant emotion was a certain not quite cynical detachment amid the electric buzz of the vote count and projections and the anticipation of relief that the endless push of the campaign was finally over. Sure, you couldn't ignore the victories or the big picture moments, and the day after stories would be celebratory in their way, duly restrained but with a nod to victory itself. Not unlike the next day account of a Super Bowl game or Game 7 of the World Series. Capture the triumph for a night or relish the race too close to call. Leave the dancing and crying for others, for the believers. But this night was like no other election night. There had been an investment, not just journalistic, but spiritual. Donald Trump had campaigned not just against Hillary Clinton, but also against the New York Times and the American press, the mainstream American press. And his astonishing rise to the top of the Republican Party had been built on his near-daily attacks on facts, on the very idea that facts matter. For journalists who approach truth like a secular religion and who have seen 1,000 times how a single true story could gut the political career of a lying politician, it had been a year of faith-shaking disbelief. A line had not just been crossed, but obliterated. The shock was palpable as the numbers came in, laced for some with the fading hope for a different outcome among people who generally wanted nothing more than a story worth telling. And there was still a paper to put out, a reckoning to account for. It was too much on an already long night. I slipped away. At the elevators, I ran into Sue Craig and a guy who was obviously not from the Times. Sue had broken one of the biggest stories of the campaign. She was the one who went to her mailbox one day in September and found pages from Donald Trump's tax returns in an envelope. She introduced me to her acquaintance. He had once worked for Trump. I didn't ask why he was there. Like me, Sue had decided to get away. It's too weird here, she said. We all got on the elevator. Sue, who had written a devastating story about Trump, me, whose letter to Trump's lawyers had lit up the internet for a week in October, and one of Trump's guys. We rode in silence, a strange tableau on the strangest night of the year. 14 hours earlier, as I came into the building, the Times security guard had called me over. They wanted to make sure I knew about the plans for the next morning. In the quirky ways that things happen at the Times, I had become the lawyer to see for all the things that security guys encountered, from the intruder who pilfered women's shoes to the anonymous letter weaponized with razor blades. The Times was printing thousands of extra newspapers, and tables were going to be set up outside for all the people who would be showing up to buy the New York Times for posterity's sake. The headline, I later learned, was going to read, Madam President. We had been caught flat-footed 8 years earlier when Barack Obama had made history. By the time I arrived for work early in the morning of the 2008 election, the line was already starting to snake down the sidewalk. Soon there were hundreds of Obama supporters who thought, and why wouldn't they, that the place to buy a copy of the New York Times was surely at the New York Times. Lots of things happen at the Times building. Selling newspapers is not one of them. Employees were pressed into emergency duty to cart bundles of newspapers from the Times printing plant in Queens, and the long lines outside the building stretched on into the afternoon. But it was Obama's victory in 2012 that was on my mind this morning. I vote in a neighborhood that is predominantly black and middle class. In 2012, following a drumbeat of stories about how Republicans hoped to suppress voter turnout, I walked into my polling place at a local school 8 minutes after it opened. The line already extended back to the schoolhouse door. "Did y'all sleep here?" a guy wanted to know as he stepped into the foyer. On this morning in 2016, I had arrived before dawn. I was the only one in line at my precinct's table. That all seemed like a strangely distant memory as midnight approached. I had made my escape from the building with Sue and the Trump guy. At home, I sat alone in the glow of the TV screens as the states that mattered fell into place for the Republicans. I turned it off. Donald Trump was about to become president of the United States. The next morning, in a light drizzle on a gray November day, the newspaper sales tables were set up outside the building as planned. No one stopped. The vendors sat idly amid the stacks. There was no Madam President front page. Instead, the headline read, "Trump triumphs," and the first two paragraphs of the lead story talked about how the vote threatened convulsions throughout the country and made an early mention of those who had watched with alarm the rise of Trump. Nearly half the country had voted for the man. I had just spent a weekend in October back in rural Illinois, in my hometown, and for a moment I allowed myself to see the coverage through the eyes of the rest of America, where, at least for this one night, his victory represented a certain kind of hope that change was going to come at last. Truth in Our Times by David McCraw. You as a contractor. Well, it passed because of millions of dollars from Uber, and now the fallout is happening. Companies across California are starting to fire their workers and telling them, "We'll hire you back." I give examples in our new video over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. They have called the Senate back into session. This was more of a bathroom break than anything else. Wow, 15 empty seats on the Republican side. CNN is reporting that Republicans have just, by and large, even given up on paying attention to these proceedings. That is obscene. That is mind-boggling. John in Cambria, California. Hey, John, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, just real quick. What about the Republicans may have a way out without having to cast a vote? And I was thinking in Article 1, Section 3, the second to the last paragraph of Section 3, where they talk about impeachment, it says that 2/3 of the members present. So if we have 6 to 10 that already are going to vote for him to convict, but if like 10 of them don't show up, then don't we have 2/3? 10 or 11 don't show up? Don't we already have?
I've heard that argument made before, John. And I don't know how the Senate parliamentarian has ruled on that, but I like the logic of it. And that may be why 15 Republicans are not sitting in the House or in the Senate right now, or in the joint chamber.
So.
Yeah, it may well be that that would be their strategy, to simply not, there would be a quorum, there would be a simple majority of members with all the Democrats and a few Republicans. But if the Republicans who would otherwise vote no are going to absent themselves from the proceedings, but this isn't the moment of the vote. I mean, what boggles my mind is that some of these guys are not even bothering to pay attention. But excellent point.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
So we'll see how it plays out. John, thanks a lot. Fran in Bainbridge Island. Hey, Fran, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, Tom, thank you. I wanted to comment as I observed these House managers with their really eloquent speeches and taped together clips from Trump, how disciplined they are being on 2 points. One is they're very, very careful not to blame Republicans as a whole. They're very, very focused on Trump. And the other thing is they are not blaming the people who followed him. They are making the point that they answered his call. So I think what they're doing is laying this strategy aware that their real need is to bring Republicans over. And I've just been quite struck by how consistent those two frames are in every single speech. So
yeah, and it would be almost a
observation.
reconciliation strategy. I think you're right, Fran, and I think that's a good thing, and I think it's a good strategy. And our earlier caller raised a fascinating point that possibly, if a bunch of no votes don't show up, literally aren't in the chamber. Well, we'll have to see. We'll have to wait and see. But thank you very much for the call. It's great to hear from you, Fran. Lewis in Norristown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Lewis, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I was wondering, at this point, what if there's some way that we can, that public pressure can be put on more Republicans to vote to impeach Trump. Sort of like, maybe even financial pressure, kind of how when Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz were pressured to step down and a lot of their donors stopped, cut them off. Can the same thing be done because the stakes are so high?
Wow. I just don't know. I think that we all need to be putting pressure on, particularly on the Republican senators, and you can call the United States Senate at 202-224-3121 and register your opinion. Beyond that, and social media, obviously, did you have something specific in mind, Lewis?
No, I just wonder where if somebody's on top of that, or if
I think the principal pressure on them, on a lot of these guys, is going to be the fact that some of them, all of them, eventually are going to face an election and may face a primary challenge. And the question that the Republicans have to be debating right now internally is, has Donald Trump been so wounded by this proceeding up to this point that he has lost much of his political power and we no longer have to be afraid of him or kowtow to him?
Yeah, that's the thing. Go ahead.
Well, or have people been successful in ignoring this? I mean, yesterday during the hearings, during some of the most awful part of the hearings, Fox News discovered that there was this story about this lawyer, I think he was in Oregon, in fact, who got stuck with a cat mask, a digital cat mask on his face on a Zoom call. And, this turned into the breaking news on Fox News that they cut away from the hearings for. Lawyer looks like cat. So this is just how crazy it is. Lewis, I want to get some more calls in before they come back. Thank you for the call. Robert in Baxley, Georgia. Hey, Robert, what's up?
Hey, Tom, thank you for taking my call. I want to make a comment, and then I want to ask you a question. Do you remember when Adam Schiff stood on the floor during the first impeachment and told him, if you don't convict him now, impeach him now, he's going to do it again?
Yep.
And he did it again.
Yep.
And the question I want to ask, if I were some kind of bank dealer in a bank and they caught me stealing money and they fired me and I had to go to jail for it. Okay, when I went before the judge, if the judge set a date for my trial, if I didn't have nobody to go on my bond, I would have to go back to jail until my trial comes. Well, they convicted, they impeached Trump while he was in office. And Mitch McConnell put it off until after he was out of office. Now the Republicans saying they can't impeach him because he ain't in office no more. But he did. Right. He was convicted while he was still in office.
He was indicted while he was still in office. You're absolutely right. And the House managers said that they were prepared to make a presentation before the Senate the day after they had that impeachment vote. And Mitch McConnell, as you correctly point out, Robert, said, nah, we're going to wait until the day after he's no longer in office. And then, of course, they argued we can't hold the trial anymore because he's no longer in office. It is the most bizarre kind of circular logic. Robert, thank you very much. Dave in Bellingham, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Well, I just wanted to reply to the fellow that called about putting financial pressure on the senators. I've been calling national corporations. Kroger's I've called. I patronized them. I've called the pharmaceutical company. I'm a 68-year-old type 2 diabetic, and I've called the companies that make my meds to put pressure on them. And I just think if enough people call those corporations and say, we're going to stop patronizing you if you continue to support Republican senators.
Politicians.
We'll put some pressure.
Yeah, that's and these companies. Judd Legum has been doing some great reporting on this, with his daily newsletter, and he's been on this show before, and about specifically calling out corporations. And what he finds is that they go forward with these great proclamations. Well, we're no longer going to be sending money to Josh Hawley. And then what you discover is kind of in the back door, they're shoveling money into PACs and super PACs that support Josh Hawley. So, but they no longer have their name on a specific contribution to a specific senator. So I don't, I'm just like I'm not a fan of boycotts. It's for the same reason. I mean, you can use them to make a political statement, but if you think that they're going to be effective in terms of changing the behavior of these corporations, or more importantly, of these Republican senators, it's going to be a real tough one. It's going to be a real tough one. David in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Just a minute to the break, David. Quick one.
Yeah, there's got to be a decent amount of Trump supporters listening to this show, but hardly any of them have called in and said they changed their minds about things. In my world, I talk to a lot of Trump supporters, and they're more emblazoned than ever. There's 72 million of them out there. I just don't know where this is going to end up.
Well, that's the concern. If it is not positively, if the Senate does not vote to convict Donald Trump, Trump is going to claim that he's been vindicated, that all these things that were said about him were lies, that the jury disregarded them, and probably the majority of Trump supporters are going to believe that, are going to go with that. And it does concern me, David. As to whether or not there are a lot of Trump supporters listening to this program, I do think that people kind of self-sort, and the Trump supporters are listening to right-wing radio right now, and the Biden supporters are listening to this kind of program. But there are some, and we always welcome their calls. They just don't seem to be that numerous right now. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
The Senate should be coming back into session any minute now, and between now and then, well, we'll keep you up to date. It's 45 minutes past the hour. And welcome back, Marion in South Beach, Oregon. Hey, Marion, what's up?
Thanks for taking my call. I just wanted to reiterate what your previous caller had mentioned about giving the senators an out. I think there's a lot of decent Republican people, voters out there, as well as some of the senators that aren't complicit in this. And if the voters in those states with the Republican senators would call in and tell them, if you feel like your stomach is churning through these proceedings, stay home. Just stay home. Mm-hmm. If they can get 12 of them to stay home, that way they don't have to worry about the primaries, and it's a way out without causing too much.
Yeah, excellent point, Marion. I'm sorry to cut you off, but Julian or Joaquin Castro is going to be speaking in just a second. He's coming up to the dais right now, so I'm going to bail out and see if we've got. Okay. Do we have Joaquin Castro?
The President Trump's conduct.
Thank you, Marion.
Now,
I'd like to spend some time talking about the harm to our national security and our standing in the world. On January 6th, when President Trump incited a mob to march to the Capitol, he led them to a building that houses some of our nation's most sensitive information. And consider who was part of that mob. Some of the individuals were on the FBI watch list. The past behavior of some individuals led here by President Trump so alarmed investigators that their names had been added to the National Terrorist Screening Database. And at least one of the insurrectionists may have intended to steal information and give it to a foreign adversary. According to charging documents, Riley Williams allegedly helped steal a laptop from Speaker Pelosi's office to, quote, send the computer device to a friend in Russia, who then planned to sell the device to SVR, Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service. While we can't be certain if or how many foreign spies infiltrated the crowd, or at least coordinated with those who did, we can be sure that any enemy who wanted access to our secrets would have wanted to be part of that mob inside these halls. And the point is this: many of the insurrectionists that President Trump incited to invade this chamber were dangerous. People on the FBI watch list, violent extremists, white supremacists. And these insurrectionists, incited by President Trump, threatened our national security. Stealing laptops again from Speaker Pelosi's office, taking documents from Leader McConnell's desk, snapping photographs, as you saw in the videos earlier, in sensitive areas, ransacking your offices, rifling through your desks. The President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief, knew the risk of anyone breaching the Capitol. He swore an oath to preserve, protect, and defend this country. And yet, he incited them here to break into the Capitol. Senators, as you all know, we have spent trillions of dollars building the strongest military in the world, on the most sophisticated weaponry on the planet, to prevent the kind of attack that occurred at this Capitol on January 6th. And here's what the insurrectionists incited by President Trump did.
Sure, Thom Hartmann. Joaquin Castro is building his case before the U.S. Senate.
I want to just get a snap of that. Yeah, I took a picture.
In many ways, this room is sacred, and so are the traditions that it represents. They've been carried on for centuries. Congress has declared war 11 times on this floor, including entering World War II. And Congress passed the Civil Rights Act and expanded the right to vote to ensure that no matter your race or your gender, you have a voice in our nation. And this floor is where history has been made. And now, our intelligence agencies and law enforcement agencies have the burden to figure out exactly what was stolen, taken, ransacked, and compromised. As acting U.S. Attorney Michael Sherwin explained, quote, materials were stolen, and we have to identify what was done, mitigate that, and it could have potential national security equities. These investigations are necessary now because of the actions of President Trump. And it wasn't people that he led here the intelligence agencies have to look into. It's also what they took and what they gathered. And it was the very fact that this building, with so much sensitive information and some classified information, that this Capitol was breached. And think about it. every foreign adversary considering attacking this building got to watch a dress rehearsal, and they saw that this Capitol could be overtaken. Elizabeth Newman, a former Trump administration official, stated, quote, "You have terrorists who would love to destroy the Capitol. They just saw how easy it was to penetrate. We just exposed a huge vulnerability." And it's not just the Capitol. This attack has implications for all government buildings. And Senator Rubio made this point well.
If you're a terrorist right now and you're sitting out there watching this, you're saying to yourself, hey, it's not that hard to get into the Capitol. Maybe that's not hard to get into the White House or the Supreme Court building or somewhere else.
Our government, our intelligence agencies, and our law enforcement have implemented additional safety measures since the attack on January 6th. But while we secure this physical space, what message will we send the rest of the world? We already know that the message our adversaries took from January 6th. This is how some of them responded after the attack. Quote, "For America's adversaries, there was no greater proof of the fallibility of Western democracy than the sight of the U.S. Capitol shrouded in smoke and besieged by a mob whipped up by their unwillingly outgoing president." And to make matters worse, our adversaries are even using the events of January 6th not only to denigrate America, but to justify their own anti-democratic behavior, calling America hypocritical. Here's what the Chinese government is saying. The spokesperson for China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said the Capitol riot should spark, quote, "deep reflection among U.S. lawmakers regarding how they discuss the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong, suggesting that the U.S. is hypocritical in denouncing Beijing's crackdown in the city while it struggles with its own unrest at home." In the Global Times, an outlet affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party, even tweeted a series of side-by-side photos of two events: the siege of the U.S. Capitol and a July 2019 incident in which pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong broke into the city's Legislative Council building. Think about that. President Trump gave the Chinese government an opening to create a false equivalency between Hong Kongers protesting for democracy and violent insurrectionists trying to overthrow it. As Representative Gallagher described in real time,
and if we don't think other countries around the world are watching this happen right now, if we don't think the Chinese Communist Party is sitting back and laughing, then we're deluding ourselves. So call it off, Mr. President. We need you to call this off.
Russia has also seized on this violent attack against our government, decrying that democracy is, quote, over. The chairman of the Russian Upper House of Parliament's International Affairs Committee said, quote, "The celebration of democracy is over. This is, alas, actually the bottom. I say this without a hint of gloating. America is no longer charting the course and therefore has lost all its rights to set it, and especially to impose it on others." They're using President Trump's incitement of an insurrection to declare that democracy is over. In Iran, the supreme leader is using President Trump's incitement of insurrection to mock America. He said of the situation in the United States, quote, "This is their democracy and human rights. This is their election scandal. These are their values. These values are being mocked by the whole world. Even their friends are laughing at them."
It's the Senate trial of Donald J. Trump for incitement to insurrection. I would say treason as well, frankly. We'll continue the conversation tomorrow, Lord willing, and the snow don't rise. And in the meantime, get out there, get active. Don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It wasn't designed that way. It's never worked that way. Democracy requires your participation. The number for the U.S. Senate, 202-224-3121. Tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Plexiderm, real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. Gabby takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at gabby.com/Tom. HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. And Superbeats, heart chews for heart healthy energy. More info at superbeatsradio.com/Tom.